life, wisdom.
I'm Psychetruth correspondent Corrina Rachel, and today on the Truth Talks, we're talking about nutrition. Does it matter? Does it not matter? Leave a comment letting me know what you think. Is it true that we can eat whatever we want and still be healthy? I'm talking today with Dr. Vincent Bellonzi. He is a practitioner of functional medicine, a doctor of chiropractic, and a clinical nutritionist practicing here in Austin, Texas. Thank you so much for being
Always
here
glad
with
to
me.
come in, yeah.
So, it's been said you can eat whatever you want and still be healthy. Nutrition doesn't matter. Is that true?
The people that I hear that the most from are actually medical doctors. So sometimes it makes me question whether they're really in real life or not. But I don't know how you can say that, because there's so many studies, there's so many books that have indicated that it does make a difference. And for a medical doctor to tell people that it's not going to matter, I have several patients that come in and they'll relate that to me. Well, I went to my doctor and I asked them, well, is it okay if I eat junk food or whatever? And the doctor will say, oh, it doesn't matter as long as it's in moderation. And then other doctors will say, well, it really doesn't matter. It's just calories in, calories out. And that's ridiculous if you understand physiology, because that's not the way it is.
Right.
The first place I'd point to is a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration by a guy named Weston Price. He was a dentist, doctor of dental surgery. And he traveled and met with indigenous peoples, lived with them for long periods of time. And he observed that when they ate their ancestral diet, that when they ate, let's say, natural foods that their bodies were accustomed to, that they were very healthy and really had no chronic disease or health problems. They'd have broken bones and scrapes and things like that, but they just didn't seem to have any of the heart disease, cancer, things that he was used to seeing in Western civilization. Mm-hmm. And he went to Eskimos, the Maasai, and several other groups. And he observed also that when they changed their diet to what he was used to eating, when they consumed a conventional diet, that one thing he remarked on in several pictures in the book of perfect teeth, beautiful bridges and very straight teeth, pearly white, that when they started a Western diet, their teeth fell out and discolored and all these things happened. Wow. That they started creating heart disease and cancer and other chronic situations that weren't there at all from the beginning. And other doctors that he would see visiting these tribes and such would also remark that they just weren't treating those things until they went to a Western diet. So a simple change in diet, and suddenly you have sick people. Mm-hmm. And study after study shows us that it's going to be a completely different situation depending on what you eat. Recently, they actually found that depending on what you eat, you have a different population of organisms in your gut. If I eat processed grains and let's say more of the westernized diet, I'm going to have different critters living in me. Those different critters create a different situation, a different setup for hormones and everything else. Ghrelin and leptin change. You basically end up finding it harder to lose weight, harder to regulate thyroid. I mean, a lot of changes that they tracked in this study. And they found that if you ate real food, you had a different population that didn't create all those problems. And we could go study after study showing just a simple change in nutrient intake makes a difference in what happens in your body. The whole organic and non-organic situation. If I eat organic foods, I get phytonutrients that communicate things to my body and I get a response. I eat the industrialized foods, I get that straight, but I eat the industrialized non-organic foods and I don't get that communication because those plants were catered to and taken care of. So depending on what I choose to eat, I'm going to get a different response.
So, I mean, what would be your opinion on, why is it that you could call yourself a doctor and look someone in the eye and tell them that it doesn't matter what they eat? Go ahead, eat tons of junk food.
Because they don't know. If I get a doctorate, I've studied one thing. And if I study medical conventional medicine, I'm going to learn to diagnose and prescribe medication. I'm going to learn surgical procedures, but I'm going to learn aggressive treatment with people that have problems. I'll give you an example. I used to have several friends that were sheriffs, and they all worked in a facility where there were inmates, okay? So their view of the world that everybody was evil, because day after day, they went and they worked with people who were inmates. Right. And when they went out and met with regular people, they didn't treat them very nicely because they expected them to be evil as well.
Right.
So I think many doctors, that's the only education they have. They don't learn about nutrition. They don't really learn about physiology beyond what drugs do to physiology. They learn it, but in that direction. And I think they start assuming that everybody is sick. They also assume that in their population, these are people that are not necessarily compliant or really looking at their lifestyle, so they figure nobody will. So they start making assumptions. And because they don't address nutrition, they don't see it make any difference. I had one doctor tell me that they don't do nutrition. And I really came back with, well, yes, you do, because your patients eat, don't they? And he said, of course, yes. Well, then you're doing nutrition. So you can either help them do better nutrition and get better results with whatever you're doing, or you can allow them to continue eating what they eat. And I guess that gives you job security. Of course, didn't get a very good response, but this idea that the doctors have nothing to do with nutrition, well, it's part of life, and it's going to create, again, different responses.
Right. And I think, it's interesting because in our, public education system, we don't ever really learn about nutrition. I mean, I don't ever remember them, teaching me about foods or teaching me, you always know like, oh, there's bad foods. Okay, well, you're not supposed to eat fried foods, and well, this is junk food or whatever, but there's never really given a clear understanding of, well, what does that mean? What does a junk food do to you? Why would you want to not eat a junk food? And so all of us that have grown up in this kind of education system over these last several decades, well, now we're met with huge amounts of chronic disease. And, certainly if we can reverse some of these chronic diseases with nutrition, then it should be clear that we can prevent many of these chronic diseases with nutrition.
Well, it's an interesting question. And one of the problems is even the people that teach nutrition are teaching something that's not really accurate, whether you're talking about food groups or pyramids or whatever. And we need a teaching method, but we really do need to show people that there's going to be a difference depending on their choices. There are repercussions. And I think we've gotten to this point that people don't believe they're responsible, that they're going to wait until there's a problem and then let somebody else address it.
Right.
And that's not a good answer, because if you let something get that late in its development, it's going to be a lot harder to turn it around. But I can use nutrition as just an effective tool as any medication out there, especially if I address it early enough.
Right.
And it's absolutely going to make a difference. I think people do assume because perhaps it's not as strong acting as a drug that it's not going to be that effective, right? You can eat hamburgers for a while before you get the heart attack or whatever criteria we're going to use. But if I take a pill, I get an almost immediate response, a very strong one. So there's this assumption that, okay, the lower acting thing is not effective. But if you think of the fact that your entire lifetime you're putting through foods through your body, also everything else you're putting in, you have to start considering that there's going to be a result.
Right. And this idea of using food as medicine is not something new.
No.
It's something that's been around for such a very long
time.
Yes. And so, it's interesting that, because when I first, started getting interested in nutrition, I kind of met the same thing where people go, oh man, that's a bunch of phooey. That doesn't really mean anything. That's not important. And I think it's interesting because if you, press rewind and look back, 1,000 or several thousand years ago, however far you want to go back in time, I mean, nutrition was all they had. They didn't have proton pump inhibitors or thyroid medications or any of these, treatments. And certainly, it's not to say that there isn't a place for all of these mainstream treatments and that they are certainly saving many people's lives. But this idea of, food is your medicine was really what kept people alive all the way up till now. And it's just maybe in the last 50 to 100 years that this disconnect has been made and nutrition kind of started getting this bad rap, like, oh, it's not effective or it doesn't matter. So it's kind of like, the thinking just went backwards or somehow got reversed.
Well, we started industrializing foods and the media got out there and marketed this stuff. And you're told day after day that it doesn't matter. They can market something to you that has no value at all, but it has a nice presentation, and you go buy it and you think, okay, well, somebody put it out there on the shelf, it must be okay for me. But we're finding that's not true. And even once people understand that it could make a difference, they get busy. They have so many excuses why there's no time to do it. There's no time to eat right. There's no time to get physical activity. So I'll just let it go. And then the next thing you know, you are on several medications and trying to correct the problem.
Right. And, to those people who say, oh, well, eating healthy is too expensive. I can't afford to eat healthy. I kind of just feel like, no, you know what you can't afford? A heart transplant,
Right.
Some kind of cardiovascular surgery, you can't afford to be on, think about, so many people that, have diabetes and type 2 diabetes, and they're reliant on insulin and having to give themselves a shot every day or with every meal. Yeah. I mean, talk about, if you can kind of, it's just so funny to me that people, they bring up that I don't have the time for this and I don't have the money for this. And if you could really understand that, well, putting nutrition off and saying you don't have time or money for it, you're just setting yourself up for a lot more time and money you're going to have to spend, handling that disease.
You are. And it's really not a real accurate assumption, because if you look at different foods, there are ways to make it affordable. It's more convenience. It's more convenient to drive through the drive-through. And you can find ways to get the good foods in, and then of course not need to pay out for everything else. So I can get my body healthy and have that value, and I don't have to spend all that much money to get there.
Right. Some of our, what I think of as kind of, simpler guidelines for people is, just avoiding, of course, those convenience foods, the kind of pre-packaged meals, these kind of just add water, instant kind of meals, but to actually shop on the outside of the grocery store and looking for produce and creating creating meals out of, vegetables or the natural meats that you're buying or whatever. And it's kind of a shift, of perspective from that, rice-a-roni, just to add water, boxed packages, plastic, packagings of foods, over to, what we've discussed in previous videos are, the real foods that actually are going to contain the nutrition that we need.
And ultimately, you're making the choice. If you go to the market and you start asking for the things that are more healthy for you, they want to make money. They'll shift to that. Unfortunately, if you look up the makeup of most markets and look at what we've been voting, you'll find all the junk, because that's what people buy. The only reason some of these things that are not real food are on the shelf is because somebody continues to purchase them.
Right.
So again, if we started actually putting our money and our intention in the right place, then it would be a lot more accessible. We wouldn't have what are called food deserts now. We would be able to get those things that we need. But more and more we're finding even little farmers markets and things spring up. Maybe it's worth taking a little trip out to a little farm or something and finding some food that's going to be better for you. Yeah, it's a little effort, but there's a payoff. And the other thing is quality of life. Everybody likes to talk about longevity, but how much quality is in your life? If you've got a whole list of symptoms and you're dealing with all these different ailments, and some people just like to talk about all their pet ailments, I'd rather not have them. So if you want to have energy and be healthy and do all those things, then it does take some effort. And part of it is choosing the right things.
I think it's also interesting to consider that, when we think about the USDA food pyramid, for instance, of course, now there's My Plate and some other, some other, variations on that. These weren't created by, a council on nutrition. These were created by the Department of Agriculture.
Right.
And largely, what they're looking at is, well, how are we going to keep these different
interests? Yes.
Yeah, these agricultural, businesses.
Industries and businesses, yes.
And I think it's important for people to realize that, a lot of the times the information that we get from the USDA or from the FDA, these entities, their concern with our actual health and with the actual safety of the consumer has kind of taken a back burner
Yes.
to their need to prioritize, what's going to be good for this industry, what's going to be good for
Economic
that.
impacts, yes.
Exactly. And so, the consumer, the person, the average person like you or me, I mean, we're getting the short end of the stick. We're getting a really bad deal here because, we would depend on our government and these regulatory agencies, to kind of look out for us. And it's seeming more and more that, really the responsibility is falling on us to
It has to fall
look
on you.
out for ourselves.
I mean, ultimately, even your security, to some extent, is up to you. Your health is up to you. Waiting for the government to have a program that's going to give you health, you're never going to see it.
Right.
It comes from you. And if we're ever going to solve all the problems that are trying to be solved with government intervention, it comes back to you, because you're preventing the problem if you just learn to take care of yourself. And again, I want to emphasize quality of life. If I'm healthy, I can enjoy my life.
Right.
I can get more done. It's a different situation than, well, I'm making it through, I'm surviving.
Right. And
I don't like the survival side.
Right. And I think that, certainly, we're kind of in a culture now where, the average person, they have complaints about energy issues and fatigue, and they maybe feel like they can't concentrate, and they've been trying to lose weight and they feel like they can't lose weight. And depression. I mean, when we talk about, depression or social anxiety or these different kind of social, what are called, mental illnesses, largely it's just kind of, the standard. It's the status quo now.
Yeah.
And I think it's really great that you kind of point out that, not only what we gain in caring about our nutrition and putting just a little bit of thought into it is not only longevity and absence from disease, but more enjoyment of our life while we're living it, because we're not going to have all those little complaints.
It's interesting that you mentioned depression. In Dr. Weston Price, it's an older book, but it's still in print. But he had a conversation with the Eskimos, and he tried to describe to them depression, and they just laughed. They were rolling because they could not imagine that somebody could be incapacitated with something like depression. They only understood mourning a lost person, but that was short-lived, because if you didn't get back to your life, you were going to die. There was no place to go. You couldn't be incapacitated. So there was no way for them to explain it, and they thought it just was hilarious.
Wow, that is really, really interesting right there. So, okay, that is excellent. So we've talked about nutrition is not only going to extend your life, protect you from diseases, improve your quality of life.
Mentally and physically, yeah.
Any kind of closing recommendations for people?
Learn what the better choices are. And to some extent, you have to experiment with yourself. And if some foods may be okay or tolerated by a few people, but maybe not by you. So you can't just make assumptions like that. So design a diet that works along with your genetics. Design a diet that doesn't cause you symptoms.
Right.
If you get indigestion from eating something, maybe you should look at that meal and say, okay, what's in there that my body doesn't like? And if you get that together, then you're not going to have all the health problems.
Right. Well, thank you so very much for being here with me today.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining me. I really hope that you found this video helpful. Please be sure to click that like button if you liked this video. I know that this news probably was not pleasing for some of you who would prefer to just not care about nutrition and not care what you eat. And if you're one of those people, be sure to leave us a comment and let me know. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you can check out all of our future videos, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.